while everyone else in the division prioritized going older and slower and more expensive, the Indianapolis Colts went for a simpler approach as they looked to take the division on the 10-year anniversary of the last time that the AFC South was claimed by the Indianapolis Colts. What's going on? I'm Elijah from Sports Talk Indy, where we cover all things Colts every single day. And the Indianapolis Colts have gotten some great news. Not only did they bolster this already pretty decent defensive line, and while stats might not show the whole picture, it's clear that they liked who they had. The big key signings in the free agency was Grover Stewart, was extending DeForest Buckner, was signing Raquan Davis. They put the franchise tag on Kwity Paye, and they still have Samson Ebukam for another year. But they also obviously spent the first round draft pick on Leatu Latu. But the big question is why? Why, when the Tennessee Titans are signing Calvin Ridley to a really massive, expensive deal, they have DeAndre Hopkins, they signed Tony Pollard, all of these big deals. The Texans got Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon. I almost said Saquon Barkley. Joe Mixon. And they're going smaller. You saw King Henry there for a decade almost of being a just dominant force for the Tennessee Titans. Everyone's going smaller. And so I think that the Chris Ballard looked at that and saw the opportunity to say, we don't need to go for these big guys. We don't need to go for the big names, but we need to go for a team that is going to stop the run, that is going to put pressure on the quarterback. And not only that, but you look at the grades for all 32 offensive lines. And PFF released these rankings for all 32 offensive lines. And the Colts not only got good news in that field, but they also got good news because ranking 29th out of 32 is the Houston Texans. Ranking 28th out of 39 is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ranking 11th out of 39, which is still good but not great, is the Tennessee Titans. And so while Tennessee Titans, bolstered their wide receiver room by adding Calvin Ridley, and Gage signs with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and obviously Stephon Diggs got traded to the Texans, the Colts didn't look to punch counter punch in a normal way that you would expect, which would be like, oh, well, we need to sign a really big cornerback or defensive back to try and do this. But they looked at the weakness, and the clear weakness for all three of these teams is the offensive line. And while some may have gotten a little bit better, the Colts really spent more time and energy and money into their defensive line than most teams in the NFL, and more than I think I would have expected. But they also they drafted the first defensive player in the draft when that may not have been the biggest priority to a lot of people. But in my mind, at least, when I look at Leatu Latu, and I criticize this pick. Like, don't get me wrong, I was very, I will say it, disappointed when Leatu Latu went off the board first for the Indianapolis Colts. I definitely thought that the Colts were going to go to a more playmaking position. I thought they were going to go wide receiver. I thought they were going to go defensive back. I thought Terrion Arnold was a lock. If I were a betting man, I would have put money on Terrion Arnold going to the Indianapolis Colts, but he didn't. And they went Leatu Latu. And it's because when the teams are getting bigger and faster, or not bigger, but they were getting faster, and in fact they were getting smaller in a lot of regards, they also didn't bolster these positions that desperately needed it. 28th out of 32 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. 29 out of 32 for the Houston Texans. I mean, they have Laramie Tunsil, who's getting older, but they also have Juice Scruggs, Jarrett Patterson, Shaq Mason, Titus Howard, which is not anything to boast about. Cam Robinson, Ezra Cleveland, Mitch Morse, Brandon Sheriff for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Anton Harrison. Nothing to write home about. And the Jaguars did make a couple signings in this field, but I don't think that they're going to climb much higher than this position that PFF has them at. And then obviously, the Titans got better. I'm still not confident in Will Levis, though. Really, really not. But they have J.C. Latham, Peter Skrosky, Lloyd Cushenberry, Daniel Brunskill, and Page skipped on me. and Dylan Raduns. A good but not great at all for these offensive lines. And so what the Colts looked at is they looked at what is the weakness of these teams, because they can try and sign a defensive back. They can try and draft a defensive back. But what are the odds they're going to be able to keep up with DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs? But what they looked at is this is the youngest, our division has the youngest quarterbacks in the NFL. Will Levis at 26 years old. Trevor Lawrence at 25 years old. C.J. Stroud at 22 years old. Anthony Richardson at 22 years old. This is the youngest quarterback grouping in the NFL by a long shot. It's not even close. I mean, the Atlanta Falcons have 2 quarterbacks now that they're paying over $20 million and $50 million each that are both older than the oldest quarterback in the AFC South. This is a clear-cut way that the Colts are going to provide relief and pressure, immediate pressure with Leatu Latu. PFF graded Leatu Latu. They graded all the edge rushers in the NFL. A 90 plus is graded as elite. 70 to 80 is graded as great. 80 to 90 is great. 70 to 80 is good. And then average, below average. They graded Leatu Latu a 96.3 out of 100, which is incredible news if you're looking at this from the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, they have even Isaiah Land, who's a guy that we don't talk about enough, who's a 70.6, an 84.4 for Samson Ebukam. You're talking about a nightmare for offensive lines is the fact that they have bolstered their defensive line, that they have added Leatu Latu, that Kwity Paye, who is emerging himself as an elite pass rusher, run defense. And then you have Samson Ebukam, who had 9 sacks last season. But before that, he's only climbing in the ranks. This is a team who's getting progressively better year in and year out on the defensive line. And adding guys like Leatu Latu, who is an elite defender already, a guy who is already, as they're saying, adding to his pass rush repertoire, who is knowing how to counter finesse moves and already causing coaches and players' jaws to drop. The Colts did it right. And they looked at what the other teams were doing and said, we're not going to beat them here, but they have a clear weakness, and that is the offensive line. And so they bolstered where it counted, and that is the defensive line. And I think the Colts are going to go really, really far in this season because of that. And I think that we're going to be all really, really impressed at how well they're going to do this next season, just specifically because of padding this defensive line unit.